Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. We have a real treat today. Two leaders in philanthropy talking about their involvement in this unprecedented time. Alan Goldston and Carol Stern, welcome. I am really pleased to have a chance to chat with you. Before we begin, I just have to say to Alan, I'm just so sorry for the loss of Bill Gates Sr. And I know you and everyone at the foundation is feeling that loss. He was a tremendous man who I think many of us in philanthropy had a chance to get to know in various ways, but not as much as you probably did. And so I think we feel his loss greatly. So let me just express that to you.
Thank you so much. He was a remarkable human being and a remarkable humanitarian. Thank you.
Indeed. So we're here at this unprecedented moment, and that word gets overused, but it's kind of hard to imagine that we could have as many crises facing us all now. We've got obviously the health crisis. We've got the economic crisis. We're going through a reckoning on social justice. Many of us are experiencing the wildfires and other signs of climate change that are striking the country, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. Your foundations care about some of those issues and working deeply on them. And of course, education is why we're here and is central to what you all do. How do you weigh all of that in this time when there's so many problems to tackle? And I'm curious how your foundations have thought about this as this moment has been unfolding. Carol, can I start with you?
Sure. You know, I think that Alan and I would agree that the problems right now existed before all the crises. You know, if anything, the crises have just shined a spotlight on them. And so both of our foundations have been addressing education and inequities. Both of our foundations look at the environment. Both are concerned with the health and welfare, you know, of our country. So for us, you know, I think it's been COVID hit. And we immediately responded with an emergency fund and, you know, a $35 million immediate response for, you know, our grantees and for some new grantees. And then the family in total has given, you know, an excess of another $180 million to the COVID crisis. But as the summer unfolded, I think that we began to look at how do we even further amplify work that we're already doing. You know, how do we ensure that inclusion is part of everything we're doing? How do we listen better, hear better, and respond better?
Alan?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, this has certainly shown a spotlight on this, and, you know, it's impossible to overstate the disruption and the devastation that's happening across the country. But obviously, communities of color and communities experiencing poverty are, you know, bearing the brunt of a lot of this devastation and disruption. You know, we're seeing unprecedented loss and learning loss and social emotional development loss in our students. If you just look at the most recent estimates from NWEA, who administers the MAP test, they're projecting that students in reading are returning to school this current school year with only 70% of the learning gains that you would typically expect. And in mathematics, it's often projected at below 50. And so when you just take a step back and say, all right, what meaning do you make of this? I completely agree with what Carol said. Many of these challenges existed before the pandemic and before the reckoning of racial and social injustice. And, you know, at the Gates Foundation, we work obviously on health globally and education domestically. And the work that we're doing in health is really focused on a rapid response to COVID. And we've invested, you know, quite a bit of resources to accelerate therapeutics and to accelerate vaccine development. And in the US, it's very much an education focused on addressing some of the immediate needs like the digital divide and helping systems grapple with and engage in providing technical assistance as they've worked to get their students connected to the devices so that they even had a chance to learn, but also looking at curriculum, math, getting the curriculum and the providers who develop those things to get them digitally enabled and to expand those things, tutoring, those types of things have been our immediate term priorities. But again, the systemic issues in our public education system will continue to be our focus And we're seeing opportunities just to continue, but also to make some shifts, which we're in the process of looking at now, given this current context that we believe might allow us with our partners to accelerate impact.
Would you be willing to give us some insight on what those shifts are? And then Carol, I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have not decided.
Okay.
We're reaching out and have been engaging with partners and experts in the field just to say, all right, so amidst this crisis, how should we be thinking about the next decade of our work in education? And so we started with listening, communities, teachers, partners, educators, entrepreneurs, for-profit providers who, like McGraw-Hill, et cetera, who provide a lot of the curricular resources in our systems. And so we're in the process of digesting those and developing ideas and concepts, and anticipate that by the end of the year, we will have made some decisions on what that might look like for us.
Great. We're going to come back and ask you those questions.
Yes, we'll be ready.
Carol, what were you going to say?
I was just going to add, I think the other piece beyond the curricular pieces, and boy, Alan, we are so aligned on what you just said, is the whole psychosocial support. And it's one of the things that we are focusing on right now. We know that school represents normalcy for children. So, you go to school, that's your schedule, and kids adjust well to that. And we also know when they're at school, they're surrounded by a lot of adults who can note when something is not right. Now a teacher is being asked to try to see that through a screen. That in and of itself is problematic. Yeah. We have kids who have been out of class for 6 to 7 months. We have others who it's been 2 to 3 months. We have others who have had no learning interruption whatsoever, going back to school together in the fall with a teacher who's never faced that before. We have kids who have experienced illness in the family, many who have experienced death in the family. We have kids who have had their geography changed because it was safer to live elsewhere. Many of them have a parent who have lost a job. So economic situation has changed. And so the psychosocial supports that might normally see where a child is in trouble are not there at a time when there's extreme pressure on that child. And unfortunately, as adults, we're going through it. The teacher's going through it. I saw, in the wake of the storms in Texas a few years ago, I remember being in a first grade classroom the first time it rained and watching a group of first graders immediately go under their desks just because it was raining. And it was like the light bulb went off of there's more that happens here, for a child, and that we have got to find ways to ensure that psychosocial support, because otherwise they're not going to digest the curricular support at all.
Completely agree with that.
It's a really, really important issue. I'm curious how you're both thinking about what you can do to influence policy, because obviously that's where a lot of the change in education comes from. Is that changing in any way because of this crisis in the moment we're going in, or is it about the same? How are you weighing that?
Well, I'll jump in. Policy is so key in education, and we've been investing in public education, early learning, K-12, post-secondary education for almost 2 decades. And we have a particular perspective on this, in that I don't see that it's philanthropy's role to set policy, but funders, I think, have a central role that they can play. And we believe this and will continue to do this and double down amidst this crisis. And I'd say maybe there's 4 things that kind of summarize this perspective. I think one is we can help decision makers have access to quality evidence and information and the related analysis that they need to understand how to make good decisions, but also to understand how their decisions are impacting the students and the families that we all want to see thrive in our public systems. We can also invest in innovation to see if new approaches can have an impact on students, a dramatic impact. So, you're seeing that unfold now. There is a grand experiment happening in education. And, one of the things that we see as our role, although clearly behind the 8 ball because this was unexpected, is to be able to look at that innovation that's happening how do you engage students and how do you try to address their social emotional needs as well as their academic needs in remote hybrid learning settings? So our ability to see how those approaches are working and what of that can work can then be perhaps considered for scale, and additional funding is a second element there. Obviously, using our voice and platforms to highlight ideas and approaches that we see are working. And then I think, finally supporting organizations that can help engage stakeholders to make sure that their voices are heard, student voice, community voice, parent voice, and to have that also be at the center of policymaking decisions, is really key. And so we see that as a role for philanthropy, and it's a role that we've played and will continue to do that, even in this unprecedented time where you just have this incredible sense of urgency to help everyone make good decisions with the best information that's out there.
I would echo all of that.
Yes, please.
I think the only piece I might, add to it also is I think the other change in policy is you see various sectors coming together on policy, which is kind of interesting. I mean, the response to COVID, where the marketplace, the philanthropic sector, and the government sector, all three coming together around asking questions that I think in previous years have been asked more independently. Yeah. One of the most exciting COVID responses I thought was what Ken Chenault and Rachel Carlson did with Stop the Spread, with their bringing together, getting corporate leaders to, make respirators when they've never made them before, asking government clear the policies to enable that, asking philanthropy underwrite the transition so they can get that going. I think it was a really interesting solution, and you see that same action. More CEOs spoke out this summer about racial unrest than I've ever seen before. That there is an intersection now between philanthropy and the other sectors on those policies.
Yeah, it's a really important point. And for those of you who didn't catch that, Stop the Spread is this effort that Carol's talking about that's really important to retool and to rethink things. You both have a long history of thinking about your foundations, about data, accountability, measurement, making sure we know what works. And Alan, you were talking about the role of information. Has the crisis, though, changed any ways in which you're thinking about this, where it is harder, certainly for groups to do some of the measurement that maybe they used to do?
I know for us, we've been looking at evaluation, and then we're also looking at how that information gets out. So it's two parts to your question. On the evaluation side, all of us, I think, have had our consciousness raised this summer, and we clearly are taking a new look and saying, are we evaluating the right things? Are we measuring efficiency or effectiveness? How are we really measuring impact, not just completion of a project? And we're really taking an even deeper look, although we have a long history of serious evaluation at the Walton Family Foundation. On the other side of getting that information out, we believe that journalism plays a really significant role in informing the public. And we have for a long time invested in journalism, and we are doubling down on that right now. We believe it is very important that parents have access to accurate information, that subject matter of interest to the public gets out there, that the learnings of the research that all of us are undertaking get shared in credible ways so people can make their right and their own decisions on things. So one of our responses is a significant investment in journalism right now.
Well, I certainly second that. Alan?
Yeah, we're obviously very committed to data and measurement and information, and how do you translate that into insights that help stakeholders, whether that's communities, teachers, students, parents, policymakers, et cetera, make good, sound decisions with the best possible information out there. And so, we're continuing along that path. That is just part of who we are at the Gates Foundation. I will say that there's been a lot of pre-COVID, a lot of questions about measurement and the forms of measurement, standardized tests, and how they tie to accountability. And, we've been listening to that, and really as just part of this ongoing dialogue and effort to engage communities to hear to really unpack this a bit and to be true to our belief that we believe in data and measurement and the types of constructs that help us get important information about our education system, whether that's formative or summative tests or student surveys or teacher surveys, et cetera, and try to unpack that from, so then what do you do with that information and how does that then get tied to policy actions, which I think there's a lot of energy and a lot of polarization in our country about this idea that you take this information and you tie high stakes accountability to it. So we're taking the opportunity and the time to say, look, we really need to continue to have measurement data and to get the information we need to get better in our education system and to serve our students and communities appropriately and equitably, and to have more of a, let's really engage and have a real conversation with all voices at the table about the types of policy actions that you might link to that data and that information.
That's really important. And throughout this conversation, you've both talked about equity issues. And certainly it's on all of our minds, and certainly all of philanthropy is committing. There's been record sums donated. More has been donated already this year specifically for racial equity than in the past 11 years, which is as long as we all have history of it. And certainly the year is not out. So I am curious, how are you thinking about racial justice issues in your education programs? Are other foundations coming to you too to talk about those issues? How is that changing in philanthropy from your perspective?
You know, for us, we believe that, racial injustice has played out in our education systems for decades. So this isn't a new issue. And I think the current context has just put a spotlight on something that many of us knew and many of us have personally experienced in our lived experience. And so, our focus will continue to be on how do we make our education system equitable, both on the opportunity side, but also on the outcome side. And, we think that whatever those strategies are that we all take that care about this and work on it, that we will always have to have better information and data. We will always have to have evidence-based solutions that help us identify what policies can reinforce and drive the types of outcomes and actions that will make our system work better for everybody, but also to close the gaps that we see play out in an unfortunate way. And so we're committed to those types of things and to be looking at the not only the policy constructs and the data constructs, but also how education is financed and funded and what are the models and innovations we're seeing across the country that we think can help get better outcomes. But our core is also just focused on instructional supports, and we are going to double down on that because in any high-performing education system, you've got to have those. And it just doesn't work if you don't have high-quality, aligned, coherent instructional systems that allow teachers and students to do their best work with no exceptions.
And I have to imagine more people are understanding that now because they're realizing how difficult it is.
Yeah.
Carol?
Similarly, we are definitely doubled down on teacher preparation, teacher instruction, ensuring that the person at the front of the room has the tools with which to teach and the skills with which to use the tools. But also that we recognize that children learn differently, that we need to have a school choice, that we have to listen to parents. We have to understand also that the American dream has changed. All the research on millennials and Gen Zs tells us that they're actually optimistic and that they see the potential to achieve an American dream. But their American dream is not my generation. It's not 2.5 kids and a white picket fence, And so we have to be willing to adjust our systems to address that, And I really do believe that if we solve the problems of education, we solve the problems of the world because our children will solve them. And we have a responsibility that education is a right, not a privilege in this country. And yet we're not delivering it right in equitable terms. the good news of a crisis, if there is one, the silver lining is that, social unrest brings change. And so not only is there a spotlight, but there's a window. And I think for all of us now, it is a time to look at what is different, what have we learned, kind of learning along the way as we're responding, sharing that learning. I think that one of the changes I've seen in the past 6 or 7 months is how often we're reaching out to one another and recognizing that none of us have the answer and that there's probably not a singular answer, but the collaboration is going to bring us there. And I think that's really exciting. And again, coming back to what I said to the last question, that intersection of bringing the marketplace, government, and philanthropy together, perhaps we will arrive at better solutions.
I think you're right. And philanthropy hasn't always been as good at collaborating, and now I'm seeing much, much more of that. And let's hope that that is one of those silver linings. I'm curious, as you look ahead and you're thinking about your programs, what is it that we think, we were just talking about how young people with good education are going to be the ones who are going to really solve our problems. But what is it that as educators and in your philanthropy, how do we prepare this next generation of learners? What are the things that are going to be most crucial, and how do we think about that in these very uncertain times?
Obviously critical thinking skills. It's not as much about the fact as how you arrive at what you believe is the fact. And again, I'm old, so I remember, we learned the facts. This was the history. This was the art. This is what you were taught. I watch my children and my grandchildren, and they are faced with a myriad of choices. Who to believe, what to believe, how to assess it. And we have to teach critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. We have to teach collaboration skills. We have to teach children to understand who and what they are and to feel the pride in who and what they are, and to learn how to ask what they don't understand. To have the ability to ask questions, a willingness to ask questions, and an ability and willingness to give answers. I think those are critical skills in addition to all of the technology skills and all of the other things that we talk about all the time that are evolving and changing.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I would add that there is a need to reinforce what I will call the softer skills, like collaboration, persistence, because the days that you go and get a degree, you're finished with school, you jump on a career pathway, and you stay on that career pathway for 20, 25, 30 years is just not the reality for most working Americans. And it's not what many young and current students want for their life. And so that requires another set of skills about how do I set goals, and then when they're circuitous in many ways and not this linear path, how do I do that? And our education systems aren't set up to accommodate that well, although you see great innovations that are enabling that. But I think we really have to prepare students with that level of skill set as well as the critical thinking skills, the ability to, just digest information and arrive at conclusions and those types of things in logical ways.
We only have a few minutes left, so I'm curious if you would like to ask each other a question. Is there something that we talked about that you would like to ask about how your foundations deal with these things, or what's on your mind? And I didn't warn you I was going to ask you that.
We didn't know you were going to ask that, and we actually had a really long conversation together about a week ago on this very topic.
Well, then let us have a window on it.
What can I learn from you? What can we do together?
Let us in.
I think that's, I don't know, Alan, anything you want to know?
Yeah, no, I should have said this at the beginning. We have such a great partnership with the Walton Family Foundation, and they are one of an array of partners that make us better and push our thinking. And we collaborate on a lot of things, and there are things that we don't do together, and we have different perspectives, and it just comes together in a great way. And as Carol said, we had a call maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago really just to get to know each other. And it was just a great conversation.
I think what's fun for us, and I think true for a number of foundations, is we represent families and individual people. And unlike more corporate institutions, the work we do is based and steeped heavily in values. And we can find commonality in those values. And it's exciting when that happens.
Yeah, so true.
That's a really important point. And I think we're going to see much more of that as we see these amazing fortunes that are being dedicated to philanthropy, and certainly the other work that Gates is involved in, particularly with the Giving Pledge and all of those efforts to encourage more of that. So I hope more people have that treat of being able to work for living donors who are really trying to advance things. I want to thank you both for a very engaging conversation. I think you helped our audience in so many ways. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope we'll get to continue these discussions at other points. Good luck with everything.
Thank you
so much. All right.